Welcome back to the My Journey podcast presented by me, Matt Johnson. I hope you're enjoying it so far. The reaction I've received has been incredible. I've had loads of great feedback, but I want to keep hearing from you. Suggested guests, what do you like, what don't you like? Let me know on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram, where you can find me by searching for The MJ Social, which is all one word. Now, on to this week. We have double the insight as I'm interviewing two guests, Jim Connolly and Nick Rotherham. Jim is the politics reporter for BBC Radio 1 and 1 Extra's Newsbeat, and Nick, having formerly worked for Newsbeat, is now working on how the BBC News teams can make the most of smart speakers such as Alexa. Both of these guys give a really good insight into their industry, have some great tips for anyone wanting to break into it, and provide an honest account of their journeys to date. Before we get into the interview, I just want to provide a little bit of context around this episode. A week prior to me heading down to London, the Brexit withdrawal agreement had just been published and the then Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, had just resigned. Therefore, Jim in particular was very busy, so I'd just like to say a big thank you to both of them for giving up their lunch break to record this. As ever, if you enjoy the podcast, make sure to check out the other episodes, subscribe, leave a review, and most importantly, share it with a friend. So here it is, episode 3 of the My Journey podcast with Jim Connolly and Nick Rotherham. Today I'm speaking to two voices of news and politics on BBC Radio 1. Jim, Nick, welcome to the podcast. How are you both?
Busy. Brexit.
So we'll come on to that in a bit. But just to start with, go back to the very beginning. So you're both from Hull?
Yeah.
So how did you find life in Hull, school life, that kind of thing?
You go first.
Yeah, it's fine. I enjoyed school, but without being rude about my hometown, I was quite desperate to get out and see something else and do something different, if I'm honest. But then conversely, I now absolutely love the place and feel like it totally formed me and made me and whatever the kind of cliches are. But at the time, as an angry 16-year-old, I could not wait to get away. But that's me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was exactly the same. Like, I didn't enjoyed school, but I didn't enjoy sixth form. I was just ready to be just out of the HU postcode and couldn't wait to get to uni. But now, pine for a move back to East Yorkshire. And like Jim said, I think being from that neck of the woods has had like a massive impact on where I am and who I am now.
So back then, did you know that this is what you wanted to do?
I don't know how honest I should be, right? I didn't do that well in my undergraduate degree, and I was working in a pea factory in a summer job, which a lot of people do in Hull.
Yeah. It's a rite of passage.
Yeah, you've got to work in one or two. I worked in both and probably did about 7 years all told while I was trying to work out what I was trying to do every summer. And in the middle of it all, I basically freaked out because I wasn't doing very well in my course at uni and thought, what on earth am I going to do? And there was a guy in my P team who said, I've just done some work experience at a load of newspapers and at Sky, and it was brilliant. I loved it, and I get into write and do stuff. And I was like, that sounds right up my street, because I basically was interested in news always, interested in politics, like sport. Then I thought, well, I quite like all of this, and I quite wanted to do something where I could write, but I didn't want to do anything in academia, and frankly, because my degree was going so badly, it wasn't going to happen anyway. So I was tanking big time, and I thought, what am I going to do? And then I wrote off a load of letters saying, give me some work, and somehow I got some work experience, and from there, that's all I've ever done, really. And it's all, I slightly kind of feel that it's just been one kind of like fallen into one thing after the other. I mean, I've worked quite hard, I think, but at the same time, it's been a collection of just things that I've just fallen into, but I wouldn't want to do anything else. And I do love my job, even though I moan about it a lot, but that's because everyone in this job moans about what they do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's just...
I wanted to be a lifeguard when I was younger, and then a couple of shifts digging plasters out the local leisure centre kind of quickly put me off that. I liked writing. I always liked writing, and I wanted to be a football writer. I wanted to be Henry Winter, basically. I wanted to write for a national newspaper about football. I mean, that quickly changed once I got a bit of experience in the industry. But yeah, initially that is what I wanted to do.
So you both studied journalism at Sheffield. You did a master's there?
I did an undergraduate in Well, I was going to be a dentist, and then I realised that I hated
know
doing
that.
something. Yeah, I did some work experience at a local dentist in Hull. Then decided it probably wasn't for me, and didn't.
You do have great teeth.
Real good teeth. Yeah, actually, yeah, my dentist loves my teeth, but they're full of holes now because I haven't really looked after them properly. But then, so I did that. Then I was like, what am I going to do? I don't really want to do sciences. I've been done A-level sciences, and I hated it. I really hated it. And I was like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then I picked up a load of university prospectuses and flicked through, and I was like, well, I'll do cultural media studies because it looks really different and weird, and it'll make it's kind of. And I was the first person in my family to go to university in my direct family. I hadn't really considered that some degrees were worth something and other degrees weren't worth anything. I wanted to get as far away from Hull as possible, and Bristol looked pretty exciting, and Birmingham and a few other places, and I was like, that looks good. And you get to make films and do some writing and look at the media all day. I was like, that sounds all right. And didn't question that everyone, and it became like the national joke of a degree, wasn't it? Media, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was like, oh, these joke degrees like media studies. I was like, and that's what I chose to do, which didn't really necessarily help me that much. But then I did, like you said, I did a master's in Sheffield in the end, and it was amazing. It was a really good course, and I loved it. And loads of the skills I got there were pretty decent. It was a really good course to get you into this, and it really, yeah, some of it you don't use because practical. Well, you go into different areas of it, but the kind of core skills that you learn there, and some of the people you meet that are quite inspiring in the course, and the course leaders were pretty decent. Because I think some of those courses, maybe some of the leaders might not be as inspiring as others, but I think at Sheffield, at least when I did it, it was like a collection of people that when you met them away from the course, you couldn't help but be impressed by them. But
Yeah.
amazing careers and done some cool things.
Yeah, definitely. Like Jim said about this idea of a joke degree, that was definitely rammed down my throat at school. Like, all my teachers wanted me to go and do English at like a traditional red brick university because I'd done quite well in language and literature in my A-levels. But I'm actually not a very good reader, and the thought of reading like 2, 3, 4 books a week, there's no way that I could do it. I'd fall asleep after a few pages, and I knew that I wanted to write, and I thought that was about football. So I looked at a couple. It was Leeds or Sheffield for me, and Sheffield was more print-based, so that's why I chose that one. And then, yeah, like Jim said, the tutors there were amazing. I mean, our admissions tutor broke the Jamie Bulger case and did loads of undercover work, football hooliganism in the 80s. And it was just so different to any kind of form of teaching that I had before. It was really hands-on, it was really practical, very few lectures. And I'm so glad that I chose to do it.
So, knowing what you know about university and your experiences there, would you say that's the route to go to get into a career like this?
No. Honestly, the only advice I've ever given anyone when they ask me what to do is go and get as much work experience as you can, and get a degree in something that you like and care about and you'll do well in, and then do a master's if you need to get the other end. That's what I would do if I was going to do it all again. But then, saying that, I might have done I think if I went back and did it all again, I'd probably do politics, philosophy, and economics as a joint thing, and then I probably would have gone into something completely different. And
That pays more.
Pays more, yeah. Pays more, or it means I don't have to run upstairs talking about Brexit. But would I be as happy? I don't know. Maybe if I got paid more, I would. But that's what I think I would do, definitely. But I would. My only advice, all I ever say to people when they say, "What should I do to get into what you do?" is just go and work for people. Go and work for your local student radio station. Go and work at the local BBC station. Go to your local commercial station. Go and do whatever you have to do just to be in there, so that it says on your CV, "I did this." Because I know that the only reason Sheffield Uni gave me an interview was definitely not because of my undergraduate degree, because it was absolute bobbins and it was worth absolutely nothing. But I had work experience at Sky. And then I had work experience at the local BBC station. Then I had work experience at everywhere I could possibly get in the door at. And I looked really committed to it. And by the time I then kind of probably grew up and stopped partying as much when I went back to do my master's, I was so committed to it that I wasn't going to fail the second time. Well, I didn't fail, but I wasn't going to blow my chances the second time. And I properly applied myself and put my head into gear and did what I should have done the first time round. And that's what I put it all down to. But it's all down to work experience. And anyone that comes in here who hasn't got work experience, I'm at Newsbeat, I'm always like, what this can't be your first place to get work experience. You need to go and like make the tea at your local radio station. You need to go and write the news in brief at your local newspaper if it still exists. You need to do all the things that are like the basics of journalism. Not just do it, but don't expect everything to be kind of like handed to you. And if you haven't done all those things and you haven't been in local radio, you're going to find it more difficult the further on in your career you get, because local radio and doing all those basics is like the absolute core of what you should be doing.
Just absolutely, to echo that, like, excuse the brag. I got a first class honours degree from Sheffield, but the reason why I mention that is because I never get an opportunity to mention it. Like, it counts for nothing, and never have I been to a job interview where someone said, "What did you do, or what did you get in your degree?" Like Jim said, it is all about whether I can record something, whether I can edit something, whether I can pick up a camera, whether I can write, and you get that from work experience, not a degree. Like, I loved my 3 years at Sheffield. I would do it again because I had such a good time, but I don't. In fact, I know for sure it's not meant that I've like got where I've got because of the degree. Not at all. It's about.
Well, it can't do, can it? Because I wouldn't be sat here because I've tanked my first bit of my degrees. I mean, like. I think, and the other thing is have ideas and be interested in things and want to find stuff out. But you'll only get that through work experience, because you'll surround yourself with actual journalists who do that, rather than a load of people who are 18, 19 who want to be journalists go and be with journalists.
Yeah, and Jim's right. When someone walks through the door here on work experience or for a trial a couple of days, if they've done the graft at local radio station, paper, press association, you immediately get more respect from the people that you're working with, because they know that you're a competent journalist.
So how did you find local BBC radio?
Amazing.
Is it brilliant?
It's hard work, and it's also, you'd end up doing everything. From setting up the next day's stories on the most random, most weird stories. I spent time at Radio Suffolk after Radio Humberside, where I went first, and my first day at Radio Suffolk, I stood on a cherry picker and described a town I didn't know anything about to a collection of people who were from that town. And I couldn't even recall the story. But at the end of it, I was like, I managed to talk for 5 minutes there without really stuttering, without really knowing what I'm going to talk about. And that actually is a really useful skill. It's not of any use now, but actually waffling on about something when you don't really know the answer sort of comes in handy later on in your career, or when you do different things in your career. And the other thing is, people are really snooty about local radio, and you can have the best career ever just staying in local radio. And that's not just staying in a kind of like, you've only stayed in local radio. Some of those people that go into local radio and then end up presenting local radio programs, doing all those things, and they're massively valuable to the local communities. And without local papers, local stations, the quality of all news in the country will be far worse off. I think it's a really sad time for journalism at the minute, watching all these local papers close. It's pretty harrowing watching like the news of the last weekend we just had with Johnson press going and stuff, and all those like newspapers closing. And you're like, what's going to happen to the future of people coming through, and also what's going to happen to people being held to account in their local area? Because a national news station is not going to hold to account a local council for doing something corrupt unless it hits like major corruption levels. But actually local corruption levels affect people's lives much more on a day-to-day basis than most national stories will ever do.
So you stayed within the BBC throughout, going on to 5 Live. How did that journey progress? Was it?
I did bits of stuff for other people, commercial stations, and then got a job at Radio Humberside for a few months that turned into about a year and a bit, and then I went to Suffolk, and then I went to 5 Live. But I went to the radio newsroom for quite a few years, which does all the news summaries for Radio 4, Radio 5 Live at that time, Radio 2, Radio 3, GNS, which is local radio stations, and it's like a summary writing system for the rest of the BBC. And there were times in it when, hand on heart, I hated it because I really struggled, because it was surrounded by all these journalists who'd worked in news and local papers and were like absolutely pedantic about grammar and pedantic about how things were written for Radio 4. That's not how we write things for Radio 4. That's not how we write things for 5 Live. And every day I felt like I was just running up against this wall of like not being able to do it. And then I come away from it, and towards the end of it I thought, no, actually this is a brilliant grounding. And the time I spent there is, although some of the toughest and most difficult and probably less creative and all these kind of things that I kind of enjoy about my job now, But actually, I look back really fondly on that, and there's some amazing people that work there who do an amazing job of keeping sure that BBC standards on the main bulletins are like perfect, and that's a really, really important thing that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, and we should be quite proud of it. And I think it's a brilliant grounding for anyone to go and work in that place. And again, there's people in that place that stay there for their entire career, and it's really hard work doing that day in, day out, coming in and writing bulletins, 3-minute bulletin, and getting all and condensing the world's news into 3 minutes and getting it grammatically correct, getting it everything about every single introduction to each person, every clip perfect, everything about it polished so it sounds like the BBC is really kind of vital. And there's a lot of people work there, and it's an amazing place. And some of the bosses and editors that I work for were just inspiring, not only because some of them could polish off quite a few pints and still be far better sorry than anyone I've ever met with.
Is it quite a clear pathway once you're within the BBC, or is it quite hard to forge?
The latter. Yeah, I think it is hard to forge. So I speak from my own experience. The BBC is great for all the reasons that Jim just mentioned, and I'm so proud to work here. And I think it's brilliant, and I don't really want to leave. I want to carry on working here and explore new departments, and it can be good for that because you can go on attachment to different parts of the BBC. I think if you, progression-wise, I think it's better to dip in and out as much as you can to get experience in the commercial sector. Before I joined the BBC, I worked for independent documentary makers, and that meant that I came in at the BBC at a far higher level than I would have done if I'd kind of started out at the BBC. It is hard to move up the ranks. I think that's in part due to the fact that there are a lot of people on staff contracts here, job for life, and they're not going anywhere fast. So for younger people coming through, it can be frustrating at times. So I think there is definite worth in dipping in and out of the BBC as kind of as much as you can and getting experience at brilliant news broadcasters like Channel 4, ITV, Sky, CNN can only like increase your skill set and probably a pay packet as well.
Yeah. I think the kind of, it's never obvious how you get to anywhere in the BBC. It feels like it should be at times, but it's not, and it can feel quite hard to jump up. But even if you don't leave, to go move around a bit side by side to different stations, go and work for different people, and even when you work somewhere, if you can get the agreement of your bosses to go and do some stuff for other people, the more you can do for different people, the better you'll be, frankly, and the better you'll be at your actual paid day job. Because if you go and do stuff, if I go and do something for 5 Live now at Newsbeat, it makes me think about story in a slightly different way than I would if I was doing it for Newsbeat, but I might come back to that Newsbeat story with a different perspective because I've had to think about it in a different way, and you might just come back with a new set of skills. So at the minute, I think we're trying to do more stuff at Newsbeat that's a bit more chatty and lively and whatever. Well, we've never done that had we not got the skills from other people working at 5 Live and doing stuff for local radio or doing... I mean, there's a thing in the BBC called GNS, which is all the local radio stations, and the stuff gets sent to you. Basically, you can, if you can do a round, you do your own story, you come up with it, you sell it to people in the BBC, and they're like, yeah. You do a round of GNS interviews, which basically means you do every single local radio station in about an hour and a half, telling the same story over and over again. And at the time, you feel like you're just going into some kind of weird alternative universe because it's so repetitive. But you walk out the door, and if you have to go into our morning meeting afterwards and try and explain that story, you'll explain it in about 5 words because you'll have honed it so much by saying it repeatedly to a collection of people in like Durham to wherever. Like it's an amazingly... There's some great things about the BBC. There are obviously some frustrating things, and how to move through it obviously is one of them because it's a bit of a swamp because it's so massive. But then, like Nick says, there are probably very few places you'd want to work outside of it doing what we do.
So if you could go back to one role throughout your career, the one where you were like, yeah, I enjoyed that time, what would it be for you? Start with uni.
I think it depends on where you are with your life and your personal side of things as well. But probably for me, the most enjoyable was my time at Newsround, the kids' TV news show. mainly because I joined the team just as we moved from London to Manchester, and so everyone was in this position where they had left partners, children, friends in London, and no one had any support network in Manchester, and therefore we just kind of like rallied round like Dunkirk spirit. It was like being at uni all over again. A group of like young, enthusiastic journalists who worked hard but also liked going out and having a few beers as well. They say never work with children or animals. At Newsround you do that every single day, and it was great. It was so much fun. And, like, journalistically, it makes you, if you've got to explain a story to a 10-year-old, it really makes you think about it, and there's no room for assumed knowledge, or you've got to get it so clear in your head that it really helps you wherever you go, I think. So, yeah, that was mine.
Jim?
I would say I'm quite a moany person, I think, so I moan about everything, and I'm quite down on everything, but then I probably look back with a lot more affection on times. And I'm thinking of, like, there's probably not one role. I loved being in local radio. I loved my time at Radio Humberside, but it was my first proper job, and I loved doing live radio cast stuff for breakfast programmes. And then I'm thinking about my current role, and I've made I've done a series of pieces about drugs, and some of those that have done the best, but that's because they're the best stories that I've worked on, have been really amazing to work on. And like, I did a piece on the dark web, buying drugs on a BBC credit account, and then driving around London with them all in a car, going and getting tested at a Home Office drugs lab, and then trying to kind of hold people to account for how easy it is to get drugs in and out of the country. That felt like I was doing something genuinely like mad, and it was a pretty kind of like just in the run up to Christmas one year, just driving around in a car, thinking this is pretty weird that I'm getting paid to driving around in a car with like a collection of Class A drugs. So that was pretty good. Just on a kind of like telling people down the pub a few months later when it goes out what you did, how you made it. That's always quite a good laugh. And some of the pieces I've done abroad, I've gone to some. When I was at 5 Live, I got a really amazing role, which falls back into my falling into it job, and I did some stuff. I went to Afghanistan. I went to the Syrian border when the conflict was at its kind of, well, was it its peak? I don't know, but it was very kind of volatile at that time. I went to the American election, and I saw Barack Obama give a speech in a massive aircraft hangar. That was pretty awesome, just because you see politics in a very different light when you see an American politician speak compared to when you see a British politician speak. It's like, these are different people, like different ballgame. The people are responding differently. And I think it's a bit crass, but some of the people I've met, like both guests and people I've worked with, have been pretty amazing. Some of the people you work with, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, are pretty weird, because it kind of attracts pretty weird people, but they're kind of brilliantly weird, a lot of them. So even the people that you think, oh God, in any other working environment, I don't know how you would exist. Those people are some of the best people to work with because of the very fact that you wouldn't work with them in any other working environment, and yet they can be some of the most senior people and the most fun people to work with. But they're mad and weird, and they've got such strange understandings of the world. But it's good to challenge yourself and good to make you think outside of what your kind of conventional norm is and what you exist in a bit of your own bubble in life. And doing this job definitely makes you not do that, because it throws you into contact with drug addicts and people who are falling out of the system, and then you meet politicians, and you can meet the Prime Minister one day and things like that. And it's like, that's a pretty... I think the humdrum of your job can be quite boring, but if you look back and think, over the last few years, I've interviewed Theresa May twice, and I haven't interviewed Corbyn because you got that one. So that was a bit disappointing. But I honestly, I've interviewed people that I thought, God, I never get to interview people like that. How do you get to do that? It's pretty cool, and it's kind of exciting, really. And it's definitely a good one when you're having a few beers with your mates who don't work in this, especially if they've got an interest in the news, to sort of sit there and chat about what happened and just the kind of like, I don't know, this going through security to go and speak to these people. Yeah. It's like this kind of, you kind of clock yourself a few times going, oh, this is pretty cool, isn't it? I'm doing something really genuinely different than most people's 9 to 5 day job, filing stuff away and putting stuff into a spreadsheet. I don't know how to work a spreadsheet. I don't know how to file anything. I am probably totally unemployable in most other environments, but it's a pretty good job most of the time. I mean, sometimes it's absolutely awful. But
I agree. That's the best bit about it. The pay's crap. The hours are long. You develop a drink dependency, but you meet some cool people and you get some great stories.
Yeah.
I've had a tour of the building, so I know that you're sat up here away from the news pit that we all see behind News at 10 and News at 6. How does that work? Do you find yourself having to do more to understand the news and get them stories that maybe are passing by, or does it work nicely because you're targeting to a Radio 1 audience?
I think you don't miss stuff if you're keeping across what's coming into the building, because we have like a system of like wires and stuff, and people in the building will go to meetings so that they're kind of across stuff. The other way, it's the other problem, I think. The problem is if you've worked on a story of your own, getting people to pick it up and buy into it is hard when you're 8 floors away from people and you're not having daily contact, so you don't know who the person is to speak to on the PM programme for that, because you don't sit near them, and you don't have, and sometimes it's a bit of a kind of, on one hand, working for Newsbeat is good because people go, oh, they represent young people and how young people think about the news. We want to do that more. We want those people to speak to us. Let's get them on, and that's and they've got a good story. Great. And then on other occasions, you can feel like, well, they're just Newsbeat. They do stories about pop music and stuff like that. And actually, we don't do that. We do lots of really decent stuff. So it takes a bit of time, I think. But I think it's down to your own personal ambition, your own personal kind of doggedness to try and work up a good story and know the story's good and then push it a bit. But it does sometimes feel like you're running up against a bit of a brick wall because of the nature of the BBC. But that's because the BBC's massive, and I don't think you can fix it. And actually, sometimes being a bit detached is quite nice, because we do a programme sometimes, and none of the stories in it will be on anyone else's news bulletin, and probably won't even have heard of it. We sometimes go to a meeting at 9 o'clock with all the BBC managers, and you can sit there and they go, oh, what are Newsbeat doing? And you can reel off a collection of stories, and you can just look at a sea of faces of people that work in like the conventional BBC News machine, and they don't know what you're talking about. And sometimes it's like, this is really annoying, and then other times they go, oh, that sounds interesting, because they've never thought of it. So I don't know, it's a bit of both.
Yeah, I'd agree, yeah. The good points and the frustrations stem from the same thing. Like, it's good that you're left to your own devices. It's frustrating that perhaps there are people in the building that aren't always in tune with what you're doing or listening to what you're doing.
I'd have never got to make any of the pieces I've done on drugs, which is the piece that I'm most proud of, had I worked anywhere else in the BBC, because you can pitch an idea here, work on it alongside your own piece, then when you've got it as a story, get the time to do it, and then sell it to other people. So you've got a story that's an actual story rather than just an idea, and then you're going to them with a proper thing, and we've filmed it and we've done this and it's really cool and it looks like this and it's going to be great. That's an easier sell than, well, I've got this idea about this and might do this and I might try and get this person. Because we've worked on it separate to the rest of the BBC and they don't know it's coming. When you turn up and go, I've got something you've never heard of because we work in a slightly different bit of the news than you, this will probably help you appear a bit more in tune with young people, which everyone's looking to do at the minute. And that's not meant in a snidey way. You're definitely in a better... If you can build the relationship that people like what you make, being able to sort of not have to deal with them and then go down to them when you've got something is kind of a good thing. It's just building that first relationship that's always more difficult. But that's kind of down to you making some good stuff and then harassing the right people to take it.
I haven't spoken to you off, Nick. I know what you're working on now, so probably the best question for you is, where do you see this kind of career going in the future?
So at the moment I'm at a department looking into what the BBC does with voice recognition devices, and I think it's potentially huge. It's one of those things that could either be the future of audio or it could fall flat on its arse and just be nothing. But I genuinely think that in a couple of years' time, every house and car will have a device that you interact with to some degree. Your phones you will kind of talk to instead of kind of like typing out all the time. I just think it's the natural way to go. As a species, we're quite lazy, and turning buttons and typing things out and searching for things, I think is will soon be seen as kind of old-fashioned. And I think maybe voice recognition is the future. Quite what we do with that and what that is, I don't think we know yet. I think the technology is quite limited at the moment. We're not able to kind of properly interact with something, but I think it's only a matter of time before we do. And I think that'll be the future of what is now radio and podcasts.
So just to round off, because I know in the middle of Brexit, it's all a big rush.
Brexit and lunch.
Yeah.
Brexit lunch.
I've just got 4 questions I'm asking everyone I speak to. So the first one is, who or what has been your biggest inspiration throughout your career? We'll start with you, Nick.
Similar to what Jim said earlier, I was the first in my family to go to university, and my gran on my mum's side was definitely like dead proud of that, and she like blew her mind that I was working for the BBC in any degree at Radio Humberside or then now at Radio 1. So I always found it really heartwarming how proud she was. There's not a single person that's kind of inspired me in the business. I think I really like to see people that I like do well, but I'm also quite ambitious and competitive kind of with that as well. So kind of I guess I've kind of pushed myself to varying degrees kind of along the way, as opposed to having that kind of mentor figure, which I've not really had.
In all seriousness, messing up my undergraduate degree was the best thing that ever happened, because I was so fearful of failure the second time round that I thought, I can't really fail again. That wouldn't be fair on anyone that had helped me at that time. So that was probably quite a good motivating factor. And then there's a few moments like working at 5 Live and working on Drive with Peter Allen, who is singly one of my all-time heroes, and was just to sit there and think, I'm actually working with him, and then got to do loads of outside broadcasts with him and be up close and working with him on stories and trying to really kind of engage him and he's quite a difficult person to engage because he's kind of very demanding and whatever. It was he's an amazing guy who I thought when I first started working for me hated me, but in the end didn't. So that was a good achievement. And I absolutely loved working with him, and hopefully it was fairly reciprocal. And then I would say, and I think I just said to you before we started recording, it's things like recording program last Thursday. We did a live program from Westminster, 15 minutes, and you look around and there's all the gazebos and there's all the press, and you can take it for granted when you do it quite a lot, but then you look around and you think, all these people here are all the people I used to look up to, and I, in my own little way, I'm sat in the middle of it on a plastic bit of garden furniture doing a radio program, but I'm doing it on the same bit of plastic garden furniture that, I don't know, whoever from 5 Live or whoever from Radio 4's doing it. And it's that's pretty good, really. So I don't think there's one person, but it's like pinching yourself when you get moments like that and thinking, I don't really... Every time you think, jack this in and do something else, you think, well, you won't get to do that, will you? Because sometimes I do think about jacking it in, because everyone thinks that, and they're lying if they don't.
So I'll explain this question once last it, because it does need a little bit of experience. It says, how much do you feel your personal brand has played a role in your career? So in other words, how has you being you got you to where you are compared to just anyone else?
I would say that is, in the current climate of the BBC, incredibly provocative, because there's a lot of drives for all sorts of diversity issues, and quite rightly, the BBC does not represent its audience at all, and I'm 100% behind the idea of changing it. But my slight, this is me going to sound like Chippy Northerner, but I think the BBC, Steph McGovern, BBC Breakfast, said something the other day that she said if the BBC was better at representing class and, for example, comprehensively educated people and people that didn't fall into the certain bracket, if you equally represented that and better represented that more sort of representatively across the whole of the organisation, you would fix a lot of your diversity issues. And I 100% think that is the biggest issue the BBC's got. And that's, I mean, I'm not criticising the BBC because it's the best place to work, bar none. But it does need to, as an organisation, and I'm sure it would probably admit this if it was a talking entity, needs to fix its representation of lots of different groupings across society. But if it fixed its class representation, it would fix all of the others without even trying, because the whole of the media is not representative of the whole of the country on issues of race, issues of gender, issues of sexuality, and massively on issues of class. And I'm not like some kind of working class hero, but I am from a northern town. I went to a comprehensive school and had a normal background, and don't feel that there are many people that do that across lots of minority groups. And maybe that's a minority group in itself.
Yeah, completely agree. I think you have to look at you are a makeup of like where you're from and your family, and same as Jim, northern city, bog standard comprehensive school, and therefore we have interests that perhaps other people in this building don't. Like, of course, this building has lots of privately educated Oxbridge people, because this building is full of very, very bright, intelligent people. But it's important, as Jim said, to represent all voices. And if we think that we can do that for northern working class towns and cities, then great.
But don't get me wrong. Being northern has definitely not hindered me. And actually, sometimes people, it probably like, maybe it's the only box that I can tick, so actually it's quite good in a sense. I don't tick a lot of boxes on a diversity front on the face of it. So that, I suppose, you kind of, like you say, do you play up to it? No, I've never played up to it. I was actually embarrassed about being northern when I used to do broadcasting at the start of my career. I used to put on a posher voice and pretend to be that. And people back home think I sound posh now because I've spent so much time down south, living and working amongst people probably who fall into that Oxford Cambridge category, and that's in my social life and in my own work life. But I'm massively proud of where I'm from, and I think actually those towns are badly represented, and I don't know, it needs to change, and the only way you change it is to employ people that are from those towns, and to employ people that have got a wide set of backgrounds. And you would do that, but like I said before, you would do it instantly if you fixed your class comprehensive issue, because people from all genders, all races, all sexualities fall into that class issue far more easily than any other way of trying to sort of fix a problem, which there definitely is within the BBC, and definitely is within the media, and definitely is within the kind of chattering classes across society, that there aren't enough people who represent your average bus. If you get on a bus, do they look like the people that work in this building? No, they don't. And that is because they're not coming from the right places. That's not, don't employ people from good, like great degrees or whatever and great backgrounds, but you need to reflect society, and by doing that you would fix the problem very, very much quicker than you would trying to sort of do it in other ways, I think. And I think you would fix another big issue of class within the BBC by doing it.
Especially on the presenting side, people nowadays, because there's so much more insight into what you guys do, people have favourites and people that they don't like listening to and stuff like that. So actually just being yourself is probably one of the best ways, because if you're what people like to interact with, then you're probably going to get somewhere within the industry.
I think so, yeah. I mean, if you look at Radio 1 and 1 Extra schedules, it's packed full of personality. I don't think news should be any different. Like, I think you should tune into news because you like the people kind of sat behind the mic. And for me, the more regional accents you can get in that news presentation, the better.
So we'll go to you with this one, Nick.
More flat vowels.
No.
Can you give us like one tip, trick, nugget of info about your industry, your career that might just entertain people at home or give them something?
Because that did get me thinking. Okay, similar to like what I said with Newsround, I would say never assume knowledge. Don't think that you're cleverer than the people you're talking to, and don't be ashamed if you don't understand something. Like, explain things in the simplest terms. Ask the stupidest questions of people that you're interviewing, because if you don't understand something, the audience don't, and if they don't understand something, they aren't going to carry on listening.
And final question.
Go on.
If someone is looking to get into a similar career to you, what would your top tip be?
There is only one tip. It's work experience, more work experience, and get it everywhere you can, because if you only get it in one place and you kind of fall into your first job because of it, brilliant, that's an amazing thing to do and you've done brilliantly well. But it's so good to have lots of different things to look back on and draw on. But it's also just quite nice to have done lots of different things in your life. I mean, life would be very boring if the first job you walked into was like, oh, well, I walked in and I was reading the 6 o'clock news one day and that was what I did for my job. I mean, it would be amazing. I mean, it wouldn't be for me because I wouldn't want to read the 6 o'clock news out every day. But for lots of people, that would be like the best thing ever. However, wouldn't you want to think that you've worked as the local reporter for the, I don't know, Norwich Herald or whatever, or the Hull Daily Mail, and covered some really amazingly interesting stories, so that when you're sat on the 6 o'clock news reading out stuff and shaping a news bulletin, you have the knowledge and understanding of what is going on behind all that, and that you understand the kind of the journalism behind it, because it's so important that you get the basics, and you'll only get that through doing like lots of jobs and moving around a bit. And don't stay anywhere too long, I think, is always what people say, which is, or at least keep moving within a department, as in like don't just do one thing all the time, because it's quite, you get bored, don't you? I mean, and that's basically what is going to happen. You get bored, and also the more you move, the more likely you are to find something you really get into. But work experience is the main thing.
And I'd say, on top of that, agree. Be nice to people, and it sounds stupid, but when you start out, if you're starting with other people, they aren't your competition, they aren't your enemies. It's not like some greasy pole that you're trying to climb, because these people will be your peers for the rest of your career, and you never know when you'll need them professionally or personally. Like, they're your drinking partners, they're your rocks. Like, don't just kiss arse and try and spend time with management all the time.
I think that's a great place to end it. If people want to follow you on social media, what are your handles?
They want to see pictures of my craft ale vinyl and my ever-failing house project. And some real inane politics. GYME7, which is a hilarious Simpsons reference, because it's Jim. Oh no, Gime. Look it up. Gime7.
And I am at nrothers, so NROTHERS.
Thank you both very much for your time.
Cheers, thank you.
So that's another episode and another great insight into an industry. I hope you were able to take something away from it. As I said at the start of the podcast, if you enjoy these episodes, please subscribe on iTunes or follow the podcast on whichever platform you listen on. If it's possible, please leave a review. And finally, I want to grow this podcast so I can keep attracting interesting people to speak to. So if you can share it with the people you know, that would be fantastic. Coming up on the next couple of episodes of the My Journey podcast, we have an interview with the Le Mans 24-hour race winner and the chair of BBC Children in Need, so be sure not to miss them. Until next time, thanks for listening.